and welcome. My name is Rashim Mogha and I'm your host for this Empowered Women of the World podcast, a podcast where we talk about technology, leadership, and success. After delivering a session a couple of weeks back, I was reflecting on the questions that the audience had asked, and it was clear that many of us are looking for options to optimize our performance. I knew we had to do a podcast around it. I am excited to welcome Rebecca Rusch into our podcast today as a guest. Rebecca is a world-class explorer. She's a professional athlete. She's an acclaimed speaker and an author. She's a 7-time world champion who has spent last 4 decades pushing her own body, mind, and spirit to absolute edge of her own capabilities. Her award-winning film, Blood Road, inspires evolution through the story of becoming the first person to bike the entire 1,800-kilometer Ho Chi Minh Trail. Welcome, Rebecca.
Hi, it's so great to be here. Thank you.
Rebecca, when we had our first conversation, I was so impressed by your journey. From being a professional athlete to becoming an entrepreneur, I would just love for you to take our audience through that journey.
Yeah, you'll find, sport has been a really common theme through my life. And I found sport at a very young age, around 12 or 13, through running. And it was really this experience that started me on a path, because what I found there, we all know as a young girl, that's a time where you're trying to figure out who you are as any boy or girl, anyone, trying to figure out who you are. And so through sport at that time, I found community, I found hard work, I found commitment, goal setting, friends, confidence, strength, purpose, all these things that I didn't realize at such a young age were really going to change my life. But I did know I always wanted to be in sports and have sport be part of my life, mostly because it made me feel good and it made me feel happy and like I belonged. And so through college and afterwards, I really experimented in a ton of other sports like rock climbing, kayaking, adventure racing, biking, all sorts of things. I had no goals or aspirations to be a professional athlete. I just liked doing these things because I could go exploring and traveling. And so I shaped my education and my early career to be around sports. And I took business and marketing with a kinesiology minor. And then after college, I started teaching rock climbing and working in gyms, and eventually opened some of the first rock climbing gyms in the country. And so I was owner and manager of a string of rock climbing gyms, and it was a total dream job. I was like, okay, my college career, my sport, they're all put together. And then what happened is I started getting invited to go on these events and go to these races where they needed a female, and there weren't many women doing a lot of sport. And so was getting opportunities to travel the world. And so I quit my dream job and said, okay, I'm just going to go travel and use sport as a way to see the world. And then I'll get back to regular work after that. But really what that did, that ended up changing my trajectory. And I filled multiple passports and ended up finding out I was pretty good at sport. And so I ended up getting more invitations, and then I started to form a business around it and going and getting sponsors and writing race reports and basically managing the finances for a team. And so I didn't really realize it at the time, but I was a real trailblazer in the sports industry as a female, mostly in male-dominated sports, and kind of figure out, okay, well, if I get invited to do these things, how can I make a business out of it?
Yeah.
And still not thinking, okay, I'm going to go to the Olympics or be a professional athlete. It was more, how can I keep traveling? How can I keep doing these fun things and shape it as a business? And that really ended up becoming my career. And now, many decades later, I've got lots of world championships and wins. I've founded Rebecca's Private Idaho, which is a big 1,500 person event. I have a foundation, keynote speaker, all the stuff you talked about. And, in many of these spaces, I'm one of the first women. And it's really just because the common theme was adventure and being outdoors, and also me not taking no for an answer and being like, well, women haven't done that before, or nobody's done that before. It's like, okay, well, I'm going to try. What do I have to lose? And so that passion and sort of stubbornness and maybe tenacity really has brought me here, where I'm 55 and have had a professional and sports career my whole life. And it continues to be my template for learning and being in the outdoors, and now ultimately sharing that experience and what I like to call wilderness wisdom with the rest of the world. So a long sort of circuitous journey, but really with the theme of me loving to explore and be outside and push my body as a vehicle.
So I have so many questions, but I know I have to restrain myself over here. But let's talk about, peak performance. Let's talk about, because there's so many leaders listening to this conversation today. We have listeners from over 60 countries tuning in and listening to this podcast. I want to ask you, how should leaders think about peak performance, and what should they be doing to make sure that they are working at a level that allows them to demonstrate their peak performance?
Yeah, and I love this question. Thank you for asking this, because this is really part of my mission of this next phase of my career, is to really help all people, athletes, entrepreneurs, executives, parents, all understand that our body is the one package that we have to move through life. And if we treat it as an athlete, if we treat our body with an athletic mindset and athletic discipline, we're going to perform better cognitively, spiritually, emotionally, physically. We're just going to feel better. And science, ancient practices know this, but also science is catching up, showing that, when you move, when you walk, blood flow is brain flow. And so lots of people are finding when they go for a walk, their creativity opens up. Their mood is in a better place. And so I'm really passionate about everyone who wants to be a high-performing human to treat their body as an athletic body, because it is. And that doesn't have to mean you go ride your bike up Kilimanjaro or ride the Ho Chi Minh Trail, but it means some of the athletic disciplines that maybe we all learned in sports as kids, but we forgot about it when we became adults. Simple things like recess that we had in school. You work for an hour and go out and take a recess for 15 minutes and run around outside. It's good for your brain, your body. There's actually, you've talked about some of the, 25-minute working, your brain can only sit at the computer for so long. And so for high performance, for executives, taking an athletic discipline means hydrating, drinking water, getting up and walking around, joining a sports team. A lot of people, adults especially, they've sort of given up on sports. And when they find them again, that will implement already that kind of discipline of meeting a community, going and having fun. The kids shouldn't be the only ones who get to play and do sport. And so I think it's important for adults to actually join a team or join a group or have a walking group in the mornings, or have walking meetings is another way that executives can put movement into their day. And, there is so much science behind things like setting small goals and setting big goals. So setting a really audacious 10-year plan. I want to, empower all of the women of the world like you have. But that didn't start without taking a small step. It's like, daily discipline habits eventually 10 years, 5 years down the road lead to big achievements. But when we put something huge on our goal, like I want to win the Olympics, that doesn't happen without the daily practices. And so I really want to encourage people to think of their body and their brain super connected as a high performing mechanism that if we treat it well, you will perform better at any level, as a human, as an executive, as a parent, whatever it might be.
Yeah, and I am a big fan of walk and talk meetings. I don't know if you have read some of the work that I put forward around that, but I really do not like to have any more one-on-one meetings that are not walk and talk meetings. My creative meetings are always walk and talk meetings, because when I'm moving and when I'm away from my laptop, I realize that my creative energy is at a completely different level.
Totally.
And that allows me to really think about problems differently. especially at work.
The other thing I would add, and sorry to interrupt you, but the other thing I would add is that, that I learned through athletics is having ongoing coaching and learning. Having somebody, an expert, always sort of checking in with you, keeping you accountable. And I know you talk a lot about ongoing learning and education so that we don't graduate from college or whatever and then stop learning. So lifelong learning is also a really important aspect that you bring in from the sports world of always having a coach. The best athletes in the world have coaches. Yeah. And so, we all need help figuring it out.
And then the coaches have coaches too, right?
Exactly.
That's exactly what it is. We all learn from each other through the process.
That's right.
So Rebecca, let's talk about your memoir, Rush to Glory.
Okay, so yeah, this book, it's kind of funny because I started writing race reports in the late 90s, like long before when I was doing international multi-day events for adventure racing. These were races around the world. They took like a week to complete the race. And this was long before social media or this network of digital communication and all the ways we have to express ourselves. So I would, come home from being away, in Morocco or wherever, and come home and write down my thoughts about the race. And I'd send those to my sponsors and say, here's what we did, and send them to my mom and my family. And much later, many, many years later, a publisher came to me and said, we need more books from women athletes. Do you have anything you could write? And I was like, well, I've got all these adventure stories and race reports. And so, but I didn't consider myself a writer, but I also knew, like, for a publisher to come to me and drop the opportunity in my lap, it would be stupid for me to say no. So I was really fearful. I didn't consider myself a writer, but I got a writer-athlete friend, and we took my stories and put them into a book, and they became Rush to Glory. And really, when I looked at them, I could start to see the pattern of, yes, they're adventure stories of swimming the Grand Canyon and doing all these cool things, going to Kyrgyzstan, but there were all themes in there that are lessons. And I started to realize what I call dirt dharma, but all my lessons that I'm learning, I'm practicing for life, are learning on the trail. And so that book is really a collection of things I've done, but it's also, again, like I said, a way that the outdoors and movement really can teach us things like failure and conquering fear and working with teammates and being lost and scared and cold and hungry, and what do you do? Problem solving. And so the book is really kind of adventure stories, but it was published, I just did the audio version recently, but the book was published in 2013, and so doing the audio version recently really reminded me that it's time to write another book, and it has really motivated me to take my speaking, take all of the work that I'm doing and more writing to the next level of not just my lessons from adventure stories, but actually translating those to the corporate world, to other people, translate these athletic expeditions and extreme sport lifestyle into performance tools for everyone. So that's kind of the next phase of from the first book to now where we're going with these adventure stories.
What I love about that whole part, yeah, Rebecca, is when you said I was scared, because there is one mantra that I live by, and that mantra is always say yes and then figure out how you're going to do it.
That's what I do my whole life. Yeah, people are like, did you plan this? Did you? And it's like, no. And also I say, when people ask, well, how did you know, like, you went and did that expedition, weren't you scared? And what I say is, when I feel my hands sweat and my heart race, that's a sign that I need to say yes, because it's a little bit scary. And the scary things are where we really grow.
Yeah, say yes anyways, and do it. And I love that part about it, because one of the things that I have noticed is we hold ourselves back because of the fear of unknown. And for me, it's all about taking that risk. Be careful, like evaluate your choices and everything else, but never say no to an opportunity just because you're scared, because that's the wrong approach to take.
Absolutely, I'm with you.
And then you have a film that won Emmy Award as well. What was the motivation behind that film, Rebecca?
Yeah, that film is called Blood Road, and I hope people will watch it, whether you're an athlete or not. It's a beautiful story of forgiveness and, culture and travel. But 2015 is when I did that ride, and it was the biggest expedition of my life, the most important ride or thing I've done in my career, and that was riding the length of the Ho Chi Minh Trail through Vietnam, Laos, and Cambodia. And it was a month on the trail, very rugged, very remote. It had never been done before. And the motivation behind it really was, one, to do a big, exciting expedition and explore a culture where I hadn't been. But the deeper meaning was to go to the place where my dad's plane was shot down. He was a fighter pilot in the Vietnam-American conflict, and he was shot down in 1972 and died there when I was just 3 years old. And so the idea of the expedition really came from my curiosity. I wanted to know more about his death, his life, the place where he was last alive, the people, the culture, the conflict. And so it was kind of like my own journey through history to do this ride. And he wrote letters home from the war, and he talked about his flying, he talked about remorse, he talked about the people, and he signed all those letters with the words, "Be good." And so I went to do this ride to connect with him and kind of combine my career and my skills and expertise in a way to connect with my family. And I rode with a Vietnamese cyclist because I wanted a cyclist woman because I wanted to experience the culture through her and see the country through her eyes and her experience as well. And it was very intense physically, very intense emotionally, obviously through the jungle, using a machete. We eventually did get to the place where my father died and met the son of the Lao villager, the village chief at the time, whose father had actually buried my father and his co-pilot, Carter Howell. And so I met the family member who we're connected through this thing that happened, in 1972, and we bonded as brother and sisters. Didn't even speak the same language, but it was such a beautiful experience of how much the same we all are as people. And the bike was really the vehicle that kind of let me do this kind of expedition. And ultimately what happened on that ride, it was the ride of my life. We made a beautiful film about it, but really I realized my purpose with my sport was much bigger than me winning world championships or anything like that. It was that was only the beginning of my career. And now this second half was, I really heard my dad's words, "Be good," to use my exposure, my expertise to actually help other people to be good through finding sport, through finding nature, through taking on challenges that seem impossible. And so I launched the foundation, the Be Good Foundation, in his name. And the foundation, we mobilize individuals and communities by using the bicycle as a catalyst for healing, empowerment, and evolution. And I know empowerment means a lot to you. And I chose those words because that's what bike and sport have given me. And so I launched the foundation in my dad's name, and my work has now all started to move towards sharing and helping other people become their best self. And even though my father is not on this earth anymore, the ride of Blood Road, it really provided him the opportunity to teach me from his experience, and now pushing me to do more with my experience for other people.
That's just so beautiful. I know we could continue talking about it. We'd probably need another podcast for that. But as we start wrapping up this episode, Rebecca, what is one advice that you want to leave our audience with today?
Yeah, and I so appreciate this. My biggest realization I'm 55 over the decades is that our body and our mind, they perform at their absolute best when we move, and especially if we move in nature on a regular basis. And science backs this up. We know this, experience backs this up. So while my career's been about athletic performance, I now know the athlete lifestyle, discipline, structure, goals, movement, teamwork. It was not just training me to stand on a podium, it was actually training me for life and life performance. So now my biggest mission and what I offer to the world is to educate people that an athlete lifestyle is the absolute key for high performance. for any aspect of life. So I'm sharing my wilderness wisdom to inspire, educate, and empower more people to start moving and operate at their highest level, physical, emotional, cognitive, because ultimately movement is medicine, and we have the power to administer the medicine ourselves. So that is my mission. Movement is medicine, and get more people moving.
We almost should have done this podcast as a walk and talk podcast, but
Absolutely.
Thanks to technology, you being in a completely different state than where I am today, we could still have this conversation. Rebecca, it was such a pleasure to have you on the podcast today. Thank you for sharing your insights with the eWOW podcast audience.
That was wonderful, and be good, everyone.
And my dear audience, today's resource for you is the link to the eWOW website where you can access all the upcoming events. The link is in the show notes. As always, thank you so much for joining me today. And thank you for loving, liking, supporting, and sharing the podcast. Remember, sharing is caring. I look forward to seeing you in yet another episode of our podcast. Till then, keep empowering the world.